Michigan homeowners opened their tax bills in early 2025, and a lot of them did a double take. Not once, not twice. They sat down at the kitchen table, unfolded that envelope, and stared at a number that simply did not make sense to them. In some counties across the state, annual property tax increases are hitting $900, $1,100, even $1,200 or more. And I want to be crystal clear about something before we go any further, because this is the part that tends to get lost in the headlines.
The people receiving these bills are not owners of luxury estates. They are not tech millionaires sitting on sprawling lakefront properties. They are retirees in Macomb County who bought their homes in the 1980s and thought they had their finances figured out. They are working families in Kent County juggling two incomes and still barely keeping up. They are longtime residents in Oakland County who purchased modest homes decades ago and have been watching their assessed values climb faster than their incomes ever could, faster than their raises, faster than their Social Security cost of living adjustments, faster than anything they were told to plan for. This is not a rumor circulating on social media. This is not a projection or a worst-case scenario being floated by some think tank. The bills are already in the mail. And the mechanism driving this is something most Michigan homeowners have never heard of, have never thought about, and were certainly never warned about when they signed their closing documents. It is called Michigan's Proposal A cap system, and a very specific quirk in how that cap interacts with rapidly rising home values means that 2025 assessments are delivering sticker shock at a scale this state has not seen since before the 2008 housing crash. The Consumer Price Index inflation cap for 2025 has been set at 5%, the highest it has been in over 2 decades. For a home assessed at $240,000, that translates to a $1,200 increase in taxable value in a single year, not spread over time, not phased in. 1 year, one bill, one gut punch. So today on Smart Law Wallet, we are going to break this down completely. We are going to explain where this came from, who it is hitting hardest, what legal options exist for homeowners right now, what the legislature is actually doing about it, and why the fix is a lot more complicated than the politicians making promises in front of cameras are willing to admit. Stay with me through all of this because every section builds on the last. And if you only understand part of this picture, you will not understand why so many Michigan homeowners feel completely trapped. To understand why 2025 is hitting Michigan homeowners so hard, you need to go back to a piece of legislation that most people have completely forgotten about. Proposal A, which Michigan voters approved in March of 1994 with 69% voting in favor. At the time, it was celebrated as one of the most significant property tax reforms in Michigan history, and in many ways, it genuinely was. But it also built in a structural tension, a slow-burning design flaw that is now fully and painfully visible to anyone who has opened their assessment notice this year. Before Proposal A, Michigan property taxes were based on something called the state equalized value of a property, which was supposed to reflect 50% of the property's actual market value. The math was straightforward and brutal. If your home's market value went up 15% in a year, your taxable value went up 15%, and your tax bill followed right along with it. This created extreme volatility. In rising markets, it was pricing longtime homeowners out of their own neighborhoods. People who had lived in the same house for 20 years suddenly found themselves facing tax bills they could not afford simply because the neighborhood around them had become desirable. Proposal A fixed that by creating a separate concept called taxable value, completely distinct from state equalized value. Under the Proposal A framework, which is codified in Article 9, Section 3 of the Michigan Constitution and implemented through the General Property Tax Act, the annual increase in a property's taxable value is capped at the lesser of 5% or the rate of inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index. This protection was the whole point. It meant that even if your home doubled in market value over a decade, your tax bill would grow far more slowly. It would protect you from being taxed out of a house you had lived in for years, a house you had paid off, a house you had planned to die in. And for most of the period since 1994, this system worked reasonably well. Inflation stayed moderate. Home prices appreciated, but at manageable rates. The cap did what it was supposed to do. The problem is 2025, because the cap is set at the lesser of 5% or CPI inflation, and because CPI inflation ran at 5% or higher throughout much of 2022 and 2023, the years whose inflation data feeds directly into Michigan's 2025 assessment cycle, the cap for the 2025 tax year has landed at exactly 5%. That is the ceiling. And this year, the ceiling is the floor. Every homeowner in Michigan with a principal residence is looking at a taxable value increase of up to 5%, whether they planned for it, whether they can afford it, whether they like it or not. The law that was built to protect them has hit its absolute maximum, and there is no cushion below it. The Proposal A cap system has a feature that is absolutely essential to understanding the full scope of what is happening right now. And it is the feature that has created the deepest generational inequity in Michigan's entire property tax structure. When a property changes ownership, when it is sold, transferred, or conveyed, in most circumstances, the taxable value uncaps. It resets. It goes back to the current state equalized value, which is supposed to reflect 50% of market value in the year following the sale. This uncapping mechanism was designed with a reasonable purpose in mind. The idea was to prevent the cap from compounding indefinitely and creating a situation where a property owned for 30 years is paying taxes on a taxable value that represents a tiny fraction of its actual market worth. In theory, it periodically resets the system to market-based values and prevents the cap from becoming a permanent, ever-growing subsidy for long-term owners at the expense of everyone else, including new buyers in the communities that depend on property tax revenue for schools, roads, and services. In practice, it has created one of the most jarring inequities you will find anywhere in American property tax law. Two identical homes sitting side by side on the same street in the same neighborhood can carry tax bills that are thousands of dollars apart. A homeowner who purchased their property in 2003 for $160,000 has had 22 years of capped increases accumulating. Their taxable value might be sitting at $140,000 or $145,000, even if the true market value of that home is now $340,000. Their neighbor, who bought the same model house in 2022 for $330,000, had their taxable value uncapped at purchase. It reset to $165,000 at that point, and they have been paying taxes on that much higher taxable base ever since, with annual 5% cap increases stacking on top of it year after year. That disparity between neighbors has always existed under Proposal A, but the current market environment has made it dramatically wider and far more painful. Michigan home prices increased by approximately 38% between January 2020 and January 2024, according to Federal Housing Finance Agency data for the state. That surge means that anyone who bought or sold a home in the past 3 to 4 years stepped into a market where prices had already run up substantially, had their taxable value reset to reflect that higher market price, and is now experiencing 5% annual increases on top of that already elevated base. They are being hit twice. Once at purchase by the uncapping event, and again every single year after that by the maximum cap increase. Meanwhile, their neighbor who bought the same house 20 years ago is sitting on a taxable value that bears little resemblance to what the home would fetch on the open market today. The pain from 2025 assessments is not distributed evenly across Michigan. It is concentrated. It is hitting hardest in the counties where both home values and millage rates are highest, and where the gap between long-term capped owners and recent buyers is the widest, because market appreciation has been the steepest. Oakland County, Michigan's wealthiest county by median household income, has a particularly intense version of this problem. The county includes Troy, Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills, Rochester Hills, and West Bloomfield, communities where home values have climbed significantly and where combined millage rates reflect the funding needs of well-resourced school districts and municipal services. Total millage rates in many Oakland County communities run between 48 and 62 mills. A homeowner in Troy with a taxable value of $280,000 $280,000 facing a 5% increase in 2025 sees that taxable value climb to $294,000. That is an increase of $14,000 in taxable value in a single year. At 50 mills, that translates to $700 in additional annual property tax from this year's assessment alone. And for someone who bought in 2021 or 2022 and is now experiencing their fourth or fifth consecutive maximum cap increase, the cumulative added annual cost since purchase is approaching $200 or more. Macomb County tells a different but equally important story. It covers Sterling Heights, Warren, Clinton Township, and St. Clair Shores. This is a different socioeconomic profile entirely. More working class and middle income than Oakland, communities where people are proud of what they have built and where every dollar in the household budget has a specific job to do. Total millage rates in Macomb County communities frequently run between 40 and 55 mills. In Sterling Heights, Michigan's fourth largest city, a homeowner with a taxable value of $220,000 facing the 5% cap increase is absorbing an additional $550 in annual property tax at 50 mills. For a household earning between $65,000 and $75,000 per year, which represents the median household income range for Sterling Heights, an unexpected $550 annual increase in property tax is not a line item you can absorb quietly. It is the kind of number that tips a budget that was already balanced to the edge. Kent County, anchored by Grand Rapids, has been one of Michigan's hottest real estate markets over the past 5 years. The Grand Rapids metro area saw home prices increase by approximately 52% between 2019 and 2024. That appreciation has pushed state equalized values sharply upward, and any uncapping event at sale in recent years has reset buyers to a taxable base that reflects a market running near its peak. Those buyers are now watching that already high taxable value grow at the maximum allowable rate, and they have no legal mechanism to slow it down short of a successful assessment challenge. Michigan has mechanisms designed to cushion the property tax burden for lower income and fixed income residents. Understanding those mechanisms and critically understanding their limitations is important for seeing why the current situation is particularly difficult for the people who need help the most. The Michigan Homestead Property Tax Credit, available through the Michigan income tax return filed annually, provides a credit to Michigan residents who own or rent their principal residence and whose household income is below $63,000 per year. The credit equals 60% of the amount by which property taxes exceed 3.5% of the homeowner's household income. For a homeowner earning $45,000 per year, the threshold is $1,575. Property taxes above that level are 60% creditable against state income tax liability. The maximum credit available is $2,600. This sounds genuinely helpful, and it is for people who qualify and who actually file to claim it. The problem is threefold, and each piece of the problem matters. First, the $63,000 income ceiling has not been adjusted for inflation since the program's parameters were last updated. In 2025, that ceiling covers a much narrower slice of Michigan's working and middle income homeowners than it did when it was set, because wages and incomes have risen while the ceiling has stayed frozen. Second, the credit requires filing a state income tax return and specifically claiming the credit, a process that a significant portion of eligible homeowners, particularly elderly residents, simply do not complete because they are no longer required to file and have no idea the credit exists and applies to them. Third, and most practically damaging, the credit does not solve the cash flow problem. Property taxes are due in July and December in Michigan under the General Property Tax Act. The income tax credit arrives months later after the tax year ends and returns are processed. A homeowner who does not have $200 in additional cash on hand in July cannot solve that problem by waiting for a refund that will arrive next spring. Michigan also has a poverty exemption available through local assessors under MCL 211.7U, which allows homeowners who meet federal poverty guidelines to apply for a partial or full exemption from property taxes. But this exemption requires annual application to the local board of review, typically in March, and it is subject to local board discretion on the specific relief amount. Awareness of this exemption is remarkably low outside of communities where advocacy organizations actively publicize it. Many of the people who need it most have never heard of it. The 2025 assessment cycle has generated a volume of constituent contact to Lansing that legislators across the state describe as among the highest they have ever seen on a tax-related issue. The pattern is completely consistent whether you are looking at Republican-held or Democrat-held districts. Homeowners are calling. They are emailing. They are showing up to town halls with their assessment notices physically in hand and demanding to know what their representative is going to do about it. And the legislators, to their credit, are not ignoring this. Michigan's state legislature is currently divided in a way that makes decisive action difficult. Democrats hold the state Senate with a 19-18 majority following a seat change in early 2025, and Democrats narrowly control the House as well. Governor Gretchen Whitmer is a Democrat in her second term limited from running again in 2026, which gives her some freedom to act, but also means she is managing a complicated political legacy she will be leaving behind. That political configuration means any property tax relief proposal has to navigate both chambers with nearly no margin for defection, and a governor who has been publicly cautious about proposals that would significantly reduce local government or school district revenue. Several concrete proposals have been introduced in the 2025 legislative session. The most widely discussed is a proposal to lower the Proposal A cap from the lesser of 5% or CPI to the lesser of 3% or CPI, effectively tightening the ceiling so that even in high inflation years, taxable value growth cannot exceed 3% annually. Had this been in place for 2025, it would have reduced the cap from 5% to 3%, cutting the maximum annual taxable value increase for a home with a $240,000 taxable value from $12,000 to $7,200. That would have saved the homeowner roughly $192 annually at a 40 mil rate, or $288 at a 60 mil rate. Not transformational relief, but real money for households that are counting every dollar. A second proposal would expand the income threshold for the homestead property tax credit from $63,000 to $85,000 and increase the maximum credit from $1,600 to $2,200. This would bring significantly more middle-income homeowners into the credit structure and provide meaningfully larger relief for those at the lower end of the income scale. The fiscal cost of expanding the credit to the $85,000 threshold is estimated by the Senate Fiscal Agency at approximately $340 million annually in reduced state income tax revenue. That is not a small number, and it does not come out of thin air. It comes out of the state budget, which is already managing Medicaid growth, road funding obligations, and pension system contributions simultaneously. Every conversation about lowering Michigan's property tax burden runs directly into the school funding structure that Proposal A itself created back in 1994. This is the part of the story that most media coverage glosses over entirely, and it is the part that makes the legislative math so genuinely complicated. It is also the part that explains why, despite all the political noise, meaningful structural relief has not arrived yet and may not arrive as quickly as homeowners are hoping. Before Proposal A, Michigan school districts relied heavily on local property taxes for their operating revenue, and the disparities between wealthy and poor districts were extreme. A school district in an affluent community with high property values could generate $6,000 or $7,000 per pupil in local tax revenue. A district in a low-income rural community might generate $1,500. The kids in the poorer district got less funding, worse facilities, and fewer opportunities simply because of the accident of geography. Proposal A was supposed to fix that. It simultaneously reduced local property taxes and shifted school operating funding primarily to the state through a combination of a sales tax increase from 4% to 6%, a cigarette tax increase, and a dedicated state education property tax of 6 mills levied statewide. This restructuring significantly equalized per pupil funding across districts, but school districts still levy local mills for debt service on bonds, for sinking fund projects, and for some operating millage in districts that have approved additional local levies. Those local mills are part of the combined millage rate hitting homeowners right now. Any legislative change that reduces taxable value growth or creates new exemptions reduces the local tax base, and that reduction flows through to municipal operations, county government, and the local bond and operating mills that school districts rely on for everything from building maintenance to technology upgrades. A proposal to cap annual taxable value growth at 3% rather than 5% would reduce the statewide local tax base by an estimated $1.8 billion annually based on 2025 assessment data. School districts, county governments, and municipal service providers would all absorb a piece of that reduction, and nobody has fully explained yet where the money to replace it would come from.
Among all the groups affected by 2025's 5% cap increase, one stands out as the most financially precarious, and it is a group that is too large and too vulnerable to get lost in the policy debate. These are Michigan homeowners who are retired, living on fixed incomes of Social Security and pension payments, who own their homes free and clear after decades of payments, but who face annual property tax bills that are rising faster than their income ever will again for the rest of their lives. Michigan exempts Social Security benefits from state income tax entirely under MCL 20630 and provides various pension deductions depending on the retiree's birth year and pension type. These provisions meaningfully reduce the state income tax burden for retirees.
But they do not touch property taxes. Property taxes in Michigan do not care whether your income is fixed, whether you are 72 years old, whether you paid off your mortgage in 2009, or whether you planned your retirement budget carefully and this increase is now blowing a hole through it. Consider a specific and entirely realistic scenario. A retired auto worker in Macomb County receiving $24,000 per year in Social Security and $18,000 per year in a defined benefit pension for a total household income of $42,000 annually. They own a home with a taxable value of $180,000. Their annual property tax bill at 50 mills is $9,000. After the 5% 2025 cap increase, their taxable value rises to $189,000 and their annual tax bill rises to $9,450. That $450 increase represents more than 1% of their total annual income. It sounds manageable when you write it as a dollar figure in a policy document. It is not manageable when you are that person sitting at your kitchen table in January looking at what you have available to cover groceries, medications, utilities, and home maintenance for the year ahead. Every single fixed cost increase is a zero-sum reduction somewhere else because there is no income growth coming to absorb it. This household does qualify for the homestead property tax credit. At $42,000 income, the threshold is $1,470, and taxes exceeding that amount are 60% creditable up to the $1,600 maximum. The credit would provide meaningful annual relief, but the credit arrives after the fact as a refund on an income tax return, while the property tax bill is due in July and December of the current year. The cash flow gap is real, and for a household without savings or credit available to bridge it, the gap is not a minor inconvenience. It is a crisis. Michigan homeowners who believe their property has been incorrectly assessed have a legal avenue for challenging that assessment. And in a year when assessments are generating widespread shock and panic, understanding this process in detail is genuinely important. It is not a magic solution, and I want to be honest with you about what it can and cannot accomplish. But it is a real option that is available right now, and most homeowners have no idea it exists. Under the Michigan General Property Tax Act, specifically MCL 21130, each Michigan township and city convenes a board of review in March of each year. The Board of Review has the authority to correct errors in assessments, and homeowners can appear before the board in person or submit a written protest to dispute their state equalized value, their taxable value, or the calculation methodology used in their assessment. The deadline for filing a protest with the March Board of Review is the close of business on the final day of the board session, which varies by jurisdiction but is typically in the second or third week of March. Here is the critical distinction that every homeowner considering this process needs to understand clearly. The Board of Review can correct errors. If your property was incorrectly measured, if a recently completed renovation was double counted, if comparable sales data was applied inaccurately to your specific property, if there is a factual mistake in how your assessment was calculated, the board can and should adjust the assessed value. What the board cannot do by law is reduce your taxable value simply because you feel the increase is too large or because you are struggling to afford it. The 5% cap is a legal maximum, not a target. If the underlying assessment is accurate and correctly calculated, the cap increase is what it is, and the board has no authority to change it. If a homeowner disagrees with the Board of Review's decision, the next step is the Michigan Tax Tribunal, an independent administrative court that handles property tax disputes under MCL 205.21 through 205.77. A petition to the tax tribunal must be filed by July 31st of the tax year for residential property. The tax tribunal process is considerably more formal than the Board of Review. It typically requires evidence, comparable sales, independent appraisals, documentation of property condition, and sometimes expert testimony. But it also carries real authority. The tax tribunal can make binding reductions in assessed value, and its decisions cannot simply be overridden by the local assessor. For homeowners with a genuinely valid factual challenge to their assessment, the tax tribunal is a powerful avenue that is worth taking seriously. Michigan is not the only state facing pressure on property taxes from the collision of rapidly rising home values and assessment structures that were simply never designed to handle this rate of appreciation. But Michigan's situation in 2025 is a useful and important lens for understanding a national problem that is building in state after state, and that will arrive in many more places on a similar timeline as their assessment cycles catch up to the market. California's Proposition 13, passed in 1978, caps annual assessed value increases at 2%. That is tighter than Michigan's Proposal A, and it has created the same generational disparities between longtime owners and recent buyers, except more extreme, more entrenched, and accumulated over a longer period. Longtime California homeowners in desirable markets are paying property taxes on assessed values that represent a small fraction of their home's current worth, while recent buyers in the same neighborhood pay taxes on full market value. The disparity has become a defining feature of California housing policy debates for decades. Florida's Save Our Homes Amendment caps annual increases for homesteaded properties at 3% or CPI, whichever is lower. Texas has no income tax but carries among the highest property tax rates in the country. And the Texas legislature has been in near continuous conflict over property tax relief for the past 4 years, ultimately passing a $12.7 billion relief package in 2023 that included a homestead exemption increase from $40,000 to $100,000. The relief was real, but the political fight to get it done was brutal, and the underlying pressure has not gone away. What all of these states have in common is that they built cap structures during periods of moderate inflation and moderate home price appreciation. Those structures are now being tested by an inflationary period and a housing market surge that nobody designing these systems in the 1970s, 1980s, or 1990s anticipated or planned for. When inflation runs at 7% or 8% as it did in 2022, and when home prices rise 15% to 20% in a single year, the caps that were supposed to provide stability become maximum acceleration mechanisms. They stop protecting homeowners and start guaranteeing the largest legally permissible increase year after year. The national median home price increased from approximately $329,000 in January 2021 to approximately $417,000 in January 2024, a 26.7% increase in just 3 years, according to Federal Reserve economic data. That pace of appreciation, combined with elevated CPI readings in 2022 and 2023, has pushed assessment-related property tax increases to levels that cap systems in multiple states were not designed to handle gracefully. Michigan in 2025 is not a unique problem. It is an early warning. Other states are watching closely because they know their turn is coming. Here is the part that is genuinely hard to deliver as good news, because the timing of where we are makes genuine near-term relief difficult. The legislative window for meaningful property tax relief that would affect the 2025 tax year is essentially closed. Assessment notices have been sent. The March Board of Review sessions are complete or nearly complete in most jurisdictions across the state. Property tax bills will be issued in July 2025 based on the assessments that have already been finalized. Any legislation passed between now and July would not change those bills unless it includes retroactive relief provisions, which are administratively complex, politically difficult to design, and operationally challenging to implement because they require local governments to issue corrected bills, process refunds, or carry forward credits against future payments. The more realistic target for meaningful structural legislative action is the 2026 tax year. A proposal to lower the annual cap from 5% to 3%, if passed by the full legislature and signed by the governor before December 31st, 2025, could take effect for the January 2026 assessment cycle. That would require both chambers to reach agreement on the specific cap level, on the fiscal offset for the $1.8 billion reduction in local tax base, on the companion provisions for homestead credit expansion, and on senior circuit breaker protections. All of this within a legislative calendar that also includes a 2025-2026 state budget negotiation, school aid funding decisions, and the beginning of serious campaign activity ahead of the 2026 elections, in which all 110 House seats and all 38 Senate seats will be on the ballot. Governor Whitmer has expressed general support for property tax relief, but has not publicly endorsed a specific cap reduction figure or committed to a signing timeline. Her administration is visibly balancing the homeowner relief pressure against the fiscal implications for local governments and school districts. The $340 million annual cost of expanding the homestead property tax credit alone is not a trivial budget line for a state managing Medicaid growth, road funding obligations, and pension system contributions simultaneously. Something is going to have to give somewhere, and the harder that trade-off becomes, the slower the legislative process moves. So let us bring this together and be direct about where things actually stand. Michigan homeowners are sitting right now with real bills in hand and real dollar amounts they were not expecting and did not budget for. The 5% proposal ACAP in 2025, the highest it has been in over 2 decades, is the direct mechanism driving increases of $900, $100, and $200 or more for hundreds of thousands of households across Oakland, Macomb, Kent, and other counties across the state. The system that was designed in 1994 to protect homeowners from volatile assessments is functioning in this high inflation year as a 5% escalator that nobody voted for explicitly this year, and that nobody has a straightforward way to stop. The legislative response is real. The conversations happening in Lansing are genuine, but they are also slow, complicated, and constrained by the fiscal realities of a state that cannot simply absorb $1.8 billion in local tax base reduction without deciding what gets cut to fill the gap. The homestead property tax credit expansion, estimated at $340 million annually, and the proposed senior circuit breaker are moving through a legislature operating with a 1-seat Senate majority and essentially no margin for legislative error. The most realistic near-term outcome is targeted relief for lower income and fixed income homeowners through credit expansions and senior protections, with the larger structural cap question getting pushed into 2026 budget negotiations. That is meaningful for the people it reaches. And it is genuinely insufficient for the working families in Sterling Heights and the recent buyers in Grand Rapids who do not fall into any available relief category, but are still absorbing $100 and $200 more per year with no help coming. The question Michigan is now sitting with is the same question that will arrive in California, in Florida, in Texas, and across this country on a similar timeline. If the legislature lowers the proposal ACAP to 3% and local governments lose $1.8 billion in tax base annually, where exactly should that money come from? And which services are you personally comfortable seeing reduced to pay for that relief? That is not a rhetorical question. That is the actual policy choice. And until Michigan lawmakers give a specific, honest, and detailed answer to it, the $1,200 property tax bomb is going to keep landing on doorsteps across this state. And the people opening those envelopes are going to keep doing double takes at their kitchen tables. If this video helped you understand what is actually happening and what your options are, share it with someone in Michigan who needs to see it. And if you have been hit by this assessment increase and you want to know more about the Board of Review process or the tax tribunal, drop your situation in the comments. We read everything. This is Smart Law Wallet, and we will see you in the next one.